A new wave of prospects and risks is mesmerizing a global community of investors, societies, non-governmental organizations, businesses, policymakers, religious groups, and individuals. More and more stakeholders continue to focus on the ocean or marine blue economy, its ecosystem, and all that amazes it as a salvation to many challenges and generator of opportunities. Such is their desire and their interest to look to the oceans for salvation, that more and more radical methods are being proposed as the answers to humanity. Of the many different ways in which the blue economy has been explored as the future of our world, and as I've expressed in previous podcasts, from renewable energy to zero emissions mining to extreme climate change solutions to fisheries and drones to artificial intelligence, the fourth industrial revolution, and a number of core areas. But among the most controversial, no more has been uncertain than that of seabed mining. As more attention has seen that the blue economy has focused on living resources, on people, on ecosystems, on the environment and the world around us. It is only in the last few decades, and only even more so, particularly in the last few years, most recently, has been the attention to non-living entities, such as marine minerals and what they might offer, or some have questioned, is this a price they might be willing too far to take? So, once more, greetings from those of you who have or have not been following my previous podcasts on this YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Jack Dyer, founder of the Blue Economy Future Movement, and this is my 7th episode on taking it on how we can save the planet, as long as we're interested. But in particular, this podcast focuses on whether seabed mining could be considered a potential savior, an answer to our circular economy problems and the shortages and other areas that we face in our quest to save ourselves from climate change, pollution and other threats, or is it an ultimate plunderer and harbinger which will only initiate even more challenges and problems to a already fracturing ecosystem? The question remains whether it remains viable. And for more information, please feel free to get in touch or check out my website, LinkedIn profile, or the resources on the subject. So, as with a number of my previous podcasts, I shall not go into extreme detail. Suffice to say that global seabed mining requires a whole number of challenges. Humans know comparatively little about the deep ocean. Only a mere fraction of our world has been adequately surveyed and charted and mapped, and it is an environment that very few people have penetrated. Only 3 or 4 people have penetrated to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. More people have landed on the moon and come back to survive the challenge. Far more people have orbited space and gone around Earth, visiting the International Space Station. Yet deep sea or seabed mining and yet for all that uncertainty about it, deep sea or seabed mining is becoming increasingly popular. It's been considered the savior to a number of things, such as our shortage in lithium, cobalt, manganese, and phosphorus, which takes us to the blue economy. Those of you who have seen in my previous podcasts that the blue economy is of increasingly global significance with the contributions to achieve radical things. However, the future of seabed mining and ocean surface and undersea exploitation has the potential to have dramatic changes if not considered for the very areas in fisheries, aquaculture, biotechnology, tourism and other sectors if not carefully considered. Therefore, we cannot ignore it. Global sand, shallow water, and deep seabed mining are just some of the several risks that continue to face the global blue economy. Previously, this has included the implications of climate change, human population, and others. But as we continue to reduce the sand and other factors available in terms of shallow sand mining, the more it'll impact the vulnerability to climate change and natural disaster events. In relation to seabed mining, however, it could also amplify the implications for species extinction, migration, and biodiversity loss. But above all else, there is a need to ensure that humanity avoid the crushing oblivion of total apathy and really care about the impact of the blue economy risks. So, what has most recently happened in the seabed mining environment? Well, over the last month, the world tried to reignite its interest in committing to a 1.5 degrees Celsius future and to truly commit to agreement on the Paris Agreement on climate change. However, that being said, many of the measures there went substantially short, and the world is currently committed towards a minimum of a 2.4 degrees Celsius scenario by 2050. In relation to this, this will amplify the pressures for seabed mining as an alternative source to convert towards electric vehicles and obtain other sources of rare earth minerals, irrespective of the potential costs or benefits. At the moment, the International Seabed Authority, under which has jurisdiction for allowing seabed mining or not over the globe, has been pressured by certain of its members, such as Nauru and the Cook Islands and Tonga, to finalise its position on seabed mining to determine how legitimate it will be, to determine an environmental code for permitting such environment, and by the middle of next year. They have been engaged in a number of negotiations. However, obviously the recent COVID pandemic has also made this challenging. There have also been a number of core developments, including new technological changes from Aussies and others, new mining companies that are looking to develop it, and greater expressions of interest, as well as more governments and private sector entities, including most recently just over 30 approved by the International Seabed Authority, have all committed to expressing a huge market interest and demand for the minerals contained within our oceans. However, this has not gone without its own controversy. Most recently, the World Sustainable Ocean Alliance of Youth and its policyholders created a voluntary non-binding manifesto as an expression of many youth around the world, as a passionate endorsement about what they perceived seabed mining to have the true horrors and atrocities, and based on huge unknown consequences for the blue economy, ecosystems, and other sectors. Most recently, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature also passed a resolution attended by virtual and physical delegates to again call for the world to pause seabed mining. This excludes the continuous problems that there have been about shallow sand and coastal mining throughout the developments. Those in favour of seabed mining have a number of arguments on their side. For example, as I said, the more pressure there is in places such as Britain to commit to a future of electric vehicles, and for more consumers to keep demanding smartphones which get upgraded and changed every year on the principles of consumerism, and rampant fashion changes have increased the pressure upon the mining of rare earth minerals, considering virtually none of this gets recycled. Those in favour again point to the fact that they perceive that if you mine the oceans, it is out of sight, out of mind, and therefore avoids the pollution of land sources and would have so many health, air quality, and standards of living and quality of life benefits. That's excluding the economic and potential. They are also concerned that existing sources of lithium, platinum group metals, cobalt, and other such necessary materials on places which have had political, economic instability or geopolitical tensions, land conflicts, unreliable infrastructure, electricity, or are just plain uncertain. These countries include, but not limited to, South Africa, China, Sierra Leone, Liberia, the Congo, Russia, and others, and a handful of others who dominate. Seabed mining has had no commercially successful examples to date. However, there are a few examples, such as in Namibia and South Africa, of comparative shallow water mining, which has proven on the whole to have, such as particularly for diamonds and phosphates, which has benefited significant areas. And it is that argument which has led certain countries such as the EU, certain entities such as the EU, the Secretariat of the Pacific Community, and the International Seabed Authority to try and get it in respect of the Africa, the Pacific, and Europe. Additionally, however, it must be said, and it must be also noted, that there are significant concerns on the issues. That whilst certain companies are looking to try and reduce the impact of climate change, there has been controversy, such as the example in Papua New Guinea of the Solara project, which had certain financial and technical difficulties, causing significant upheaval and disruption to the local communities, despite being touted as an initial major success, saddled the government with over $125 million in debt. Then there's the controversy about where in Mexico Odyssey started mining, only to find that the Mexican government, in response to certain community concerns and environmental movements, argued about the potential risks and implications for marine mammals. This led to the overturn of their respective license, and now they are threatening the government with $3.5 billion worth of legal penalty fees for breach of contract and license. The Cook Islands have also seen potential, despite the fact that they have their own park, and the same goes for Tonga. So there's an increasingly difference, particularly in the South Pacific, between the pressures exerted by political mining lobbying entities, alleged corruption incidents, but also at the same time the need to balance that between the potential revenues and mineral royalties that these resources might have, but also to learn from mistakes such as Nauru, and to make sure that the declared commitments to marine conservation and tourism, such as creating new reserves, is not threatened. Deep seabed mining is commonly and confusingly known by a number of different words, such as seafloor, seabed, marine mining, marine mineral mining, shallow water, midwater, and deep water, and others. However, as the most common one, I refer to the concept of seabed mining and particularly focusing on defining it in relation to the non-living mineral resources as opposed to anything living in the marine ecosystems of varying depths. To make it These seabed mining minerals consist of a number of different factors. They include, in particular, methyl hydrates, commonly used for fuel, polymetallic nodules, cobalt, manganese, and various sulfates or sulfides, and ferromanganese metals. You can see an example there from the Cook Islands of what a polymetallic nodule is, which is created through the flows of currents and minerals continuously in major depths of the oceans. Then you have the volcanic emitting ones, which have this charged by huge sediment plumes and superheated collisions and fumes embracing, which create these significant smokers and are particularly dominant around the South Pacific and the Mid-Atlantic regions for polymetallic sulfides. Whereas cobalt are particularly known for having ferromanganese and iron-based mineral components, which rely from the pressure of seawater and marine pressures in order to do it. While these things can be mined in comparative moments through vacuum suction tubes, similar techniques, it is important to note that these things take, as with land-based minerals, these things do not accumulate quickly. They can grow very, very slowly and take centuries to grow millimeters and centimeters, and thus they must be regarded as impractical as a non-replenishing renewable source, non-renewable source. This differs from other potential blue economy activities in the sense of the true nature of the blue economy is sustainable and allows for the potential replenishment of resources, revenue, profits, and whatever. Those countries who go for seabed mining may benefit initially from a huge windfall and higher royalty fees and other potential economic benefits, but it must be carefully emphasized that they will only get these benefits once off, unless they were to consider learning from the atrocious bankruptcies and failures of Nauru and its phosphate experience on land, and invested those minerals prudently and wisely. So, what is necessary if we are going to create a seabed mining industry for those who are contemplating it, as is often proposed across the world? Well, if we were to look at this, it would have to subscribe to a number of core principles, namely that of matching customer supply and demand, being as sustainable as possible, reducing costs in relation to being competitive with other entities. It must have a suitable customer service. It should allow for equitable redistribution of benefits. It should try to minimize the impact on the environment, allow for training and opportunities, and ensure that sufficient ability exists, both legally and elsewhere. So, as with any mineral commodity or base, the location of these has been relatively well documented, but it is continuous, but the extent of these depends on a number of geological, climate, oceanographic, environmental factors. It has been noted, however, that certain seamounts and other particular ocean features associated with these minerals also can have a potential, both a potential abundance of marine life and also a high rate of marine biodiversity, including many species that we have only comparatively recently discovered, and that it is highly uncertain as to what potential benefits these species might offer, both in terms of contributing to the ecosystems and to ourselves. Additionally, there is a huge interest and demand for this sector. A typical 70,000 square kilometre niche, and bearing in mind that there are over 30 such concession areas out there, totaling over 1.5 million kilometres of ocean, dominated by just over 30 companies, has potential to offer over 9 billion in exchange for over 9 billion operating costs and 2 billion in capital investment. You could get up to 42 billion over a projected lifespan of a mine. And that's only at today's current figures. However, what's even more appealing about this industry, apart from the huge potential to make lucrative profit and to gain from the huge data availability, is the fact that because of such high costs, if you do manage to get funding, you have very limited competition. And in the concession license agreements, you are less likely to be competing with anybody in your particular area, having had that concession license to yourself. A single mining operation could get several to 3 million tons or more of minerals just to get profitable. There are plans to go even deeper, use AUVs, aerial sport and other facilities. So, to establish a supply chain, what would you need? If you're looking for comparatively simple operations such as mining beaches and sand minings, all you need is a pickup truck, some manual labor, some scooping and other basic equipment. If you want to do shallow mining, then you'd have to include more basic things such as boats, sieves, pumps and other techniques. It only becomes increasingly complicated when you start going below 30 to 100 meters and go really intense. Either way, very few nations, comparative nations, have formally engaged in seabed mining, but if they were to do so, they would have to look at similar traits to land-based mining, but obviously including vessels, environment, and other similar components as processed through a port, shipping, and the marine environment. So, there are different types of equipment that are used to actually develop seabed mining. You can see the difference here between a seafloor mineral nodule collector, which rolls along, goes along and rakes up the scoper, or you can look at the other alternative, which includes just a series of pumps and collector systems to scoop up, push up, and rope it up, depending on which technique you want to pursue. Then, of course, you'd have to include stakeholder consultation. There are other costs to operating a seabed mining industry, as with any others. It will include crew, training, equipment, chemicals, maintenance, finance, administration, and other factors. Such equipment is not cheap. Just to give it a perspective, why you need, although you can make billions of dollars, you need multi-millions or billions to access to potential multi-millions or billions to even be considered for developing many of these areas. You could have up to $1 billion in operating costs on a typical mine, spend over $360 million on research costs, and $700 million on over 1.2 million on vessels and other expenses. And you have to be in it for the long term. Such results do not go reasonably quickly. It can take up to 10 to 30. It can take up to 6 years just to get 6 to 10 years just to get approval, and in another few years to start actually making profit. That's partly why the pressure for next year to finalize the regulations and speed up the process is being considered so crucial by certain stakeholder lobbying entities. Then, of course, you have to develop all the specific components and equipment, train the people to adapt, geologists, offshore oil and gas, and others. But the experience in those sectors should mean that remains comparatively quickly. So you can see here the implications between the basic nodules over there, what is the contrast between the vessels included to establish the vessels, and the elaborate equipment used versus the comparatively scooping up trucks and the relative for sand mining, which is basic shallow mining. You could see a rich, healthy, thriving ecosystem on the other hand, and then you can see what's left with only after that is removed, and there are only the nodules left. Then, of course, there is the question mark of ocean governance and surveillance. Who, in fact, is responsible for this sector, and what, in fact, do they involve? Under the 1974 United Nations Charter and previous things dating back to the moratorium principles of Grotius of the 16th century and other factors, the oceans and the seas have been commonly regarded as common property, the tragedy of commons, that, free access, free gain, free control. However, although this principle has in fact led to many challenges, including the tragedies of overfishing, marine pollution, troubles of exercising power and sovereignty and enforcement on the high seas, and a number of research developments and other factors, it is very notable that there is an exception for marine minerals. And whilst countries may have their own national jurisdiction over marine minerals under the 1994 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, which allows nations up to 200 nautical miles, that under international law, the same does not apply to areas beyond national jurisdiction, which is subject to a new ongoing high seas treaty. Currently, the International Seabed Authority has been granted the mandate by the UN as the power to determine sovereignty or lack of sovereignty and exclusive access to the minerals of the world's oceans, particularly those outside countries' exclusive economic zones, but also notably within. They have the power to influence within countries' national exclusive economic zones. And that right by the International Seabed Mining Minerals Authority has curiously been parceled out to a mere comparative few handfuls of private sector or major government or private sector based companies and initiatives. As of 2021, just over 30 of them occupying more than 1.5 million square kilometers of ocean, which is a phenomenal amount. Yet this process is currently not very democratic, only open to a handful of companies. Most of their decisions are not based in that much transparency. There's very little role for stakeholder involvement. The inclusion of professionals is not highly advised, and a lot of what they get up to is comparatively secretive. Yet these people alone, in this forum, can influence the fates of the rest of the economy, including the ecosystem, resources, and others. At the moment, the International Seabed Authority is primarily interested in mineralogical data and certain characteristics, including plume levels. They do focus on species to some extent, but less of an emphasis has been given to pollution, climate change, ecological data and other factors, or social data, or even economic. Most of it is reliant on the technical feasibility, the economic market potential, and the comparative ease or difficulty of accessing these mineral materials. The International Seabed Authority is primarily focusing on the premise of economic development through the basis of mineral extraction in the marine sphere and the technical feasibility of doing so. It is less concerned with the social aspects and environmental aspects. As can be noted in the regulations that it has passed, and the fact that its environmental code is still a work in progress, even after being established for over 25 years. Notably, there are certain countries that have been actively promoting the need to develop seabed mining. However, many of these legislations are out of date and archaic where they do exist. There are very few that followed to specifically ban seabed mining. And as for those that do have seabed mining, particularly the countries of the South Pacific, many of them purely focus on the technical and administrative process of getting licenses and renewing them, getting them revoked, and the commercial and administrative, financial and technical side of things. There's far less emphasis, once more said, for the implications for environment and sociological implications. However, if we were to develop a sustainable seabed mining industry, sand and coastal mining, I have to admit, as a maritime economist and lawyer, I have to, as well as a concerned youth, have to note a great number of problems. And the prime weaknesses I've already stated of current legislation, most particularly the fact that in many legislation they do not commit on the basis of minimizing any adverse negative effects or externality costs, on the basis of you want to be able to ensure that you are cautious when it responds to taking risks, which may even justify not taking action to avoid worsening the problems to ecosystems, to do no irreversible damage or harm, and the fact that other characteristics also need to be considered, including respecting people's uses, making sure that any waste or products that do occur do get recycled and added, and also to take into account the respective needs of other sectors. Additionally, this includes the need to create areas which allow ecosystems and nodules to recover, if pursued, to ensure that there's enough funding and support and development, both not just for community and social development, but training, research, tax, and other factors. It is also particularly beneficial to consider gaining access to the data, securing sustainable access to finance, and ensure that if there are any disputes, that they are summarily dealt with. Additionally, the examples, although there are no deep water examples of seabed mining that has become commercially successful, there are potential benefits that have been observed for shallow mining surface. First of all, there's the country of Namibia, which has successfully mined diamonds for over 3 decades. De Beers Marine has a company in Namibia with whom I've previously interviewed for my project on the Benguela region, assured me that they had significant efforts done to minimize the potential risks and harms to marine species, including taking a number of precautionary measures. They argued that they had only done a comparative small proportion of the area actually under their concession, thus allowing other species a chance to recuperate in terms of fisheries and other resources away from the pressures of other areas into which they had no influence, that they could serve an enforcement role, they could provide access to greater data, and, most notably of all, that they had offered significant economic and human capacity building developments and spending billions of rands and dollars to the local economy. A similar argument has been placed through the South African state company Alexcor, the globally famous De Beers on Small, Transets, and a number of others. As we have seen, that they have argued that monitoring over time has shown that while minerals themselves may not really recover so much, there have been examples where fisheries and species have, if left alone, been able to repopulate comparatively quickly. A survey project in Europe, on the other hand, said that there were a number of particular benefits, including the need to gain more sand for construction materials from shallow and seabed mine. They argued that as climate change risks occur and conflicts occurs in other nations making access to land mining impractical, that there was enough commercial demand to justify looking at the oceans as a potential solution. Additionally, other issues or concerns, however, though, led to the problem of the Salar, which, as already stated, may have left the country with $125 million debt. However, Nautilus Minerals, on the other hand, argued that whilst Salar was functioning, it produced at least 140 jobs, it reduced a lot of the pollution implications of land mining, and it provided a whole host of foreign revenue and export potential for other companies. Similar arguments have been argued for the Cook Islands, which considered that it had up to $10 trillion worth of resources over the next 20 years that were just sitting there as minerals. Yet the Cook Islands, at the same time, has the world's second largest marine park, thus weighing the controversy to see whether the value that can be extracted mineral resources can be equivalent to that of nature. Vanuatu has granted over 143 licenses of its own. These countries have experienced tremendous government pro-interest in the topic, but also in the resources and the failures. Additionally, there have been a number of examples where seabed mining has in fact failed, most notably in confrontations, court cases, and eventual moratoriums, suspensions, and other implications in Namibia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific. Seabed mining has had traditional problems in securing access to finance, trained people, gaining popular support and attention, marketing, and the challenge of securing enough generated revenue cash flows. Given that many of these companies entering this field are not the traditional oil and gas or mining companies, and thus do not have access to significant reserves. There is also the challenge that there are no tax or financial other potential benefits. Even case studies such as where things have potentially worked out to be profitable, such as in Namibia, it includes the examples of the sandpiper projects, which you could get significant tons of mineral resources at the price of converting the area into either being unsuitable for fisheries from an excess of jellyfish or a reduction in nutrients and other factors. Then there was the example of Nautilus and its significant debt, where they failed to provide evidence that they were taking significant risk mitigation measures to protect it. And whilst Namibia may have indicated that they have evidence of species recovery, an equivalent scientific experiment, the OMCO experiment, showed that many species had not yet returned and rejuvenated the area between 1978 and 2004. Additionally, there has been huge demand in the South Pacific to issue many permits as a solution for potential risks. Separately, Chatham Rock in New Zealand also experienced significant pressures to its phosphate mining resources when it was argued that the huge unknown ecological risk implications did not seem to be worth the proportionate socio-economic benefits and opportunities. These are many of the over 30 companies whom currently have got permission from the International Seabed Authority. As noticeable, there is significant interest from Europe, South Pacific, India, Japan, Canada, and the US only slightly. The main area of interest is the Claring-Clipperton Fracture Zone all around the South Pacific region, as can be seen in this diagram. Between the Pacific, the ocean rim. Many of these standards, of course, have thus experienced issues between others have had their rights dominated across the world, but are now under suspension. Incidentally, although huge mineral deposits have been observed across Europe and the North Sea and the Mediterranean, in contrast to the Pacific, these have not currently had an implication. Many nations have shown interest, although in Germany there's talk of industry forming their own alliance to try and share in between them the expensive resources available. However, at the moment there are many areas which have been noted for having a high concentration of mineral deposits, such as around these following sea mounts and other areas, but at the same time they have high areas of marine biodiversity and species abundance, and yet many of them are not protected. The International Seabed Authority is again only declared certain areas to be particularly environmentally sensitive. The International Seabed Authority have only now started to see about making their funding more sustainable and equitable and fairer. It does not include representatives from many different stakeholders and focuses mainly on the legal and technical side. This shows that in 2020 the significant proportion of the world's manganese and cobalt is sitting in the ocean, and a fair part of the world's copper, even 25% of the world's land-based economy, is sitting in cobalt. to actually develop it. So, if you were to embrace this future, what are the benefits, the projected benefits of sand, coastal and seabed mining? Well, if you're looking at mere shallow water sand and coastal mining, many of the stakeholders have found benefits to the construction sector and other areas in which sand is needed. However, if you're looking at coastal seabed mining, those in favour of it have argued, aside from access to the rare earth minerals themselves, you get the chance to create significant jobs, gain hugely from the royalties, training, skills development, and other opportunities. You would avoid a lot of the costs and implications of land-based pollution aspects. And, of course, all the different uses of the minerals, which has been increasingly pressured as a risk to decarbonisation. But you'd also secure other options to do tourism. But there's also, what do you do with the research data itself? The data, the pure knowledge, and the fact that we know comparatively little about these areas can offer many countries that have not previously had that chance the options of actually doing so. However, those against the concept of seabed mining representing a truly sustainable blue economy future have pointed many other risks and problems, many other disadvantages of the seabed mining experience. The fact that not a single commercial example has proven itself is of great concern to this blue maritime economist, to show that not only have many of them failed to prove themselves economically or get past the startup exploratory prospecting phase, but at the same time there's still comparatively uncertainty as to what the environment will do. It remains a highly cost-intensive and sector which is really anti-competitive. It is noticed that not only do the minerals themselves take a long time to reform, but many species do as well. There's also the unknown implications of what it might mean to fisheries, tourism, renewable energy and other such projects. Or what direct effect will it have on the changes in species, the nutrients, the turbidities, the capacity to absorb greenhouse gas emissions, promote fisheries, nutrients and other activities. We are only recently discovering what sort of species in existence live out there, particularly around hydrothermal vents, and we do not know what will happen to species, nor can many of these, particularly in light of COVID-19 and the fact that so many of these countries in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in West Africa, whatever, have pinned their hopes and dreams on tourism. And yet, the dredging, erosion, and sheer migration or death of smothering of these species may significantly deter not just local fishermen, but visitors as well. Other risks associated with seabed mining is that there's a significant, huge growing popular opposition to the movement and the challenges in courts and so forth. There are also the few technical studies that exist also make it harder to have examples to promote success. The implications of how COVID-19, financial crisis, or other risk events occur. There is also The Secretariat of the Pacific Community said that if you embrace seabed mining, there may be potential risks in the fishery license fees, which are worth over $500 million to the regional economy. It's excluding tens of thousands of jobs and other radical implications. Other risks to seabed mining, as you stated, the risks to ecosystems, the fact that many countries are less experienced or prepared for such a measure, and then of course whatever technical, geological, climate, environment, ocean risk hazards might exist at the respective location. There are many other different types of risks and concerns associated with seabed mining. And of course there are potential solutions. If you're operating seabed mining, you may produce pollution or other emissions. You may have to contend with how climate change may influence the resources, the work pattern, the storage, the transportation, and other methods. Then there's the fact that you not only have to consider transboundary impacts across neighbouring blue economy sectors, countries, regions, but also the cumulative impact of what happens with continuous seabed mining operations, and do they cease? So, moving forward into the future, survey estimates in the South Pacific says there are over 340 million tons of nickel, 275 million of copper, 78 million of cobalt, and over 7.5 million tons of manganese. The data that these explorers and contractors have found, even if they fail, this information can yield a trove of results to determining our understanding, our future planning, our conservation, and our interests for the sustainable blue economy. Then there's also the opportunity that it might have, that if we were to look at developing this, that we might get the components that we actually need to create more offshore and onshore wind turbines and solar panels, and to actually get the components that we need in order to provide it, apart from electric vehicles. That we said that if we were to get certain mineral commodities, they need to come from somewhere. Then there's the previous experience of shallow water mining, which says that over hundreds of millions of dollars could employ each company could employ hundreds of different employees, directly yield billions in investment and taxes and revenue, and provide a reasonable alternative to increased dependency on tourism grants and others particularly for small island states, developing countries with few alternative options. Yet there are, as we say, that despite all these benefits and opportunities that are spreading to a number of different countries, it has to also be said that it could lead to improved access and support to technology. It must be said, however, that seabed mining minerals is not the alternative options. There are more efficient techniques to get out of existing mines, which have already had most of their long-term damage implications consumed already, whereas if you were to go and engage in the ocean, you'd be yielding a whole lot of more ecological, climate change and other emissions being completely new. The other alternative is to embrace the principles of the circular economy, recycling and taking as many mineral resources as possible, recycling out of existing components and electronics, also allowing to use fewer of the resources that are needed to have lesser demand. In conclusion, Although we do not know what the future of global seabed mining may hold for us, it is clear that some areas are more prepared than others, such as the South Pacific. If seabed mining is to become favoured, we propose looking at some of the legal side of effects, ensuring that there is sufficient data, that people are trained and well aware of the risks and factors, and that stakeholders know what more needs to be done. It is particularly important to focus on the social environmental elements to these components, regardless of their respective benefits. And if stakeholders are to pursue seabed mining and other factors, it is highly proposed that they take as many risk mitigation measures as possible. We have to avoid the lessons that contain with us in Solara and other factors, and we have to know what might happen. We also have to remember that we are already experiencing challenges from climate change, biodiversity loss, marine pollution, and other illegal fisheries and other threats, and species are dying at an unprecedented rate since the disappearance of the dinosaurs. We still have to know what the long-term implications of seabed mining is and to fill our gaps. Many people have argued, well, that would be a basis upon which to continue seabed mining so that we can find out these risks. However, from the existing limited evidence at the time, scientists and NGOs and many communities, individuals that have been seeing the implications of land and sea-based mining, offshore oil and gas exploration, can determine precisely what such risks are. If we are to avoid this future, we need to look at, again, more sustainable, efficient methods of processing, recycling, dealing with the rare earth minerals that we do have. Additionally, it is further important that if we are going to embrace it, we need to consider what we're going to do about it. We can particularly pay attention to the fact that next year's decision about the International Seabed Authority to determine how to embrace mineral resources and others. We can reach out to those who might be entrepreneurs and come up with ideas and innovators and accelerators to make sure that it is either denied a market, or if it does occur, that there's a far more sustainable, technical, feasible way of conducting it. We can reduce our emissions and recycle wherever possible, and we can also actively work to support the Sustainable Ocean Alliance and other such stakeholders. So, in answer to the question, is seabed mining truly the answer to a viable blue economy and mineral extraction? Of all blue economy activities transforming the very future of our ecosystems, economies, coastal communities, heritage, oceanship, and very relationship, connections, or presence with the oceans, very few have been more contentious, controversial, or less understood than seabed mining. This has not been aided by a lack of transparency from the sector, the International Seabed Mining Authority and its regulators, this and lack of successful commercial examples or case studies, and the fundamental research gaps over the implications of seabed mining. What do they mean? Environmentally, economically, socially, legally, geopolitically, geologically, and technically. This podcast has shown that in answer to the fact that they now occupy over 1.5 million square kilometers of oceans and are potentially worth billions, but at the same time hold tens of thousands of undiscovered or very recently discovered species available. means that the path is very, very cautious. Given how long these minerals take to grow, given the virtually irreversible nature of any seabed mining activity, given our limited experience in marine ecological rehabilitation, a lack of planetary alternatives and risks, such as marine pollution and climate change, given what has been stated about the potential for alternatives in recycling, whatever, given the fact that it appears that we need a source for rare earth minerals and platinum group metals and others, we have to immediately decide, as of this moment, as to if the developments around us are truly sustainable, effective, profitable, and a popular decision for the future of our planet and blue economies. This detailed analysis has been my own answer to driving the answers to what these research gaps are, but I can only present the facts so that some stakeholders themselves can, as with many of the podcasts in our How to Save the Planet, decide for themselves about taking action on seabed mining, is to note whether they will be the consumers, that they will do it. Every time they think about whether they want an electric car, new smartphone, or other commodity that requires the oceans to be even considered as a potential source for minerals. As stated before, if seabed mining is to be followed, I have provided some examples of how you can improve legislation, improve the conducting from the sector. You can learn from best case scenario and other resources. And more of this is contained in the research that I've completed on my website in greater detail. We need to avoid the bankruptcy and failure of companies such as Solara and avoid the future. We have to decide if this truly reflects the answer to our global blue economy. So, thank you very much, and for more questions, please feel free to reach out on the following side. There can be no denying that these are unprecedented